continued from Andres. Not long after, Andres came back home near the Caqueta River. As soon as he arrived, he received a message that his grandfather, back home in the village of La Sabana, was dying. Immediately, Andres set out on the 3-day walk to his hometown, hoping that it's not too late to see his grandfather one last time. 6 months later, despite the shock and confusion of all the family and friends, Jim and Van Walton, along with their 2-year-old son Danny and 3-year-old daughter Diana, left the cold of Minnesota and the comfort of America to follow the call of God into the jungles of Colombia. They spent the following months trying to adjust to a brand new day-to-day existence, along with the arduous 3-month Spanish crash course and an intense prayer to know where God wanted them to go. Finally, God seemed to direct them to the tribe of the Munane people in the small village of La Sabana. On July 3rd, 1963, Jim Walton and the fellow missionary Stan Shower set out for a Catholic mission in Loma Linda, where Munane children were brought to learn the Spanish language. After a 175-mile seaplane ride into the jungles of the Amazon rainforest, Jim and Stan arrived at the Loma Linda. The Catholic priest and nuns were gracious to their guests, feeding and offering a place to rest for the night, as Jim and Stan discussed with them where they were going in hopes of finding a guide to La Sabana. They discovered that the chief of the Munane people, Chief Ferdinando, had arrived at the mission just a few days earlier to escort some of the Munane children back to the village of La Sabana. With the proper introduction and some exchanged pleasantries, the Munane chief agreed to guide them back to his home. After a day of arduous hike through the hills of the rainforest, they arrived in La Sabana, where the 2 missionaries collapsed from exhaustion into the hammocks of a guest hut. The next morning, Jim was awakened by the sound of songbirds. He walked out of the hut with the New Testament in hand to get in some morning devotion. A few children spotted him and asked if he would read the book to them in English. Jim began to read first John chapter 4 in English. The little children cackled with laughter at the sound of the strange language. Jim tried to explain some of the words to them in Spanish, but could tell right away that he was barely understood. Without a doubt, Jim would have to learn the Munane language. Standing nearby was a young man in his 20s, staring intently at Jim. He was apparently interested in what Jim was reading, but at the same time uncertain, being sure to keep his distance. In Spanish, the young man asked, "What book is that?" Jim replied, "It is the Bible." "What about it?" the young man asked. "It is God's Word, and this book is one of the reasons I want to come and live here. I wanted to learn your language and someday translate this book for your people." The young man just continued his gaze at Jim, seemingly wanting to ask more questions, yet holding his peace. Then he abruptly turned and walked away. This young man was Chief Ferdinando's son, Andres, who had arrived breathlessly at the village just days before to be at the bedside of his dying grandfather. Andres later said, "When I saw you reading that book, I knew it was the book from the radio, the book that had the truth. And when you said it was God's Word, and you wanted to put it in my language, I determined to help you." It was not long after while trying to help Jim Walton translate the Book of Truth to the Munane people that the truth broke into the heart of Andres, who came to personal faith in Jesus Christ. And for the next 18 years, Andres did assist Jim Walton in translating a first draft of the entire New Testament, a summary of the Old Testament scriptures into the Munane language, and help introduce the gospel of Jesus Christ to an isolated tribe in the Amazon jungle. It is also interesting to note that the 3 years earlier, in August of 1960, when the Lord spoke to the heart of a man by the name of Dr. Paul Freed, he was then president of the Trans World Radio. He had a vision of communicating the gospel through the radio to Central and South American countries. This vision led him to Puerto Rico in February of 1962 in hopes of opening a sub-power station to send the message of Jesus Christ to millions of people in the jungle of Central and South America. Construction of the transmitter and station began in September of 1963 on the little Caribbean island of Bonaire. By August of 1964, Spanish-speaking Christian programming was in full swing. The radio message that Andres heard in June or July of 1964 must have been one of the first 10 broadcasts of this trans-world radio project from the station at Bonaire. Can God reach into the darkest jungle with the light of the gospel? Can God carry his message into a place that it has never been? Can God relocate a person to place them in line with a head-on collision with his truth? Can God take to a blinded heart the only name that can bring sight? Can God order the events of time and space, delaying some things and expediting others to orchestrate the unthinkable? Can God take unrelated lives and tune them together into a harmony of his praise and exaltation? Can God really do all this? Jeremiah 32:27, God gives response, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me?"